The alien fleet expected a simple conquest, another quiet world to add to their empire. But when the navigator whispered the planet's name, every veteran on the bridge froze. Earth, the one world their ancestors swore never to touch. And now it was too late to turn back? Want an alternate version, shorter, darker, or more dramatic? The perfect target? The war room of the Zelthran Imperial Dreadnought hummed with quiet efficiency. Commander Draxus stood before the massive holographic display, his scaled hands clasped behind his back as he studied the rotating planet before him. It was beautiful in its simplicity. Blue oceans covered most of the surface, with green and brown landmasses scattered across the globe. White clouds swirled in predictable atmospheric patterns. Everything about it screamed vulnerability. "Gentlemen," Draxus announced, his voice carrying the authority of 15 successful campaigns. "I present to you the simplest conquest in Zelthran history." The assembled officers leaned forward in their seats, their attention focused entirely on their commander. These were veteran warriors, soldiers who had seen dozens of worlds fall before the might of the Zelthran Empire. Yet even they seemed impressed by the apparent ease of this operation. Senior Tactical Officer Vorn manipulated the holographic controls, zooming in on various regions of the planet. "Commander, our long-range scans confirmed the initial survey data. The indigenous population possesses only primitive chemical propulsion technology. No plasma weapons detected. No energy shields. No quantum communications. Their most advanced weapons appear to be guided explosives and kinetic projectiles." Laughter rippled through the room. Chemical weapons belonged in history archives, not on modern battlefields. Any civilization still using such crude technology was effectively defenseless against a proper military force. "Their space presence is minimal," Vorn continued. "Several hundred satellites in low orbit, one small space station, and a handful of probes scattered throughout their solar system. Nothing armed. Nothing that could threaten even our smallest escort vessel, much less this battle group." Draxus expanded the display to show the full Zelthran fleet. 38 warships of various classes hung in formation, from swift destroyers to the massive dreadnought he commanded. It was overwhelming force for such a primitive target. But the Empire had learned through bitter experience that adequate preparation prevented unnecessary casualties. "The indigenous population numbers approximately 7.9 billion, Draxus said. "They are divided into nearly 200 separate nation-states, despite having primitive global communication networks. This indicates poor social cohesion and endemic distrust. They fight among themselves over resources, territory, and abstract philosophical concepts. Our analysts predict they will be unable to mount coordinated resistance." Political liaison officer Krennic spoke up from his position near the back of the room. His role was to ensure military actions aligned with imperial policy and long-term strategic goals. "The population will be valuable, Commander. Initial biological scans indicate they are physically robust and adaptable to various environmental conditions. After proper conditioning and integration protocols, they will serve the Empire well in labor-intensive industries." Junior intelligence officer Zyra sat at her station, reviewing the cultural database compiled by the survey team. She was young, barely 2 cycles into her military service, but thorough in her analysis. Something in the behavioral profiles troubled her, though she could not quite identify what. The species engaged in something called persistence hunting, according to the notes. They would chase prey animals for hours, sometimes days, until the target collapsed from exhaustion. What kind of predator hunted that way? Most successful hunters use speed, strength, venom, or ambush tactics. Chasing something until it died from fatigue seemed grotesquely inefficient. Another notation caught her attention. The species demonstrated spite as a primary behavioral motivator. They would sometimes act directly against their own interests simply to prove a point or punish perceived wrongdoing. That seemed dangerously irrational. Zira highlighted the entry, intending to ask about it during the briefing. then second-guessed herself. The survey team had spent months compiling this data. They knew their work. Her concerns were probably just translation errors or cultural misunderstandings. Our strategy is straightforward, Draxus explained, pulling up tactical projections. We enter their system in standard battle formation. We establish orbital superiority over their primary population centers. We broadcast surrender terms in their dominant languages. Given their technological limitations and political fragmentation, they will recognize the futility of resistance within hours. Morn nodded his approval. If they are foolish enough to fight, we respond with precision strikes against military and industrial targets. Minimal collateral damage. The goal is to demonstrate overwhelming superiority while preserving the population and infrastructure for integration into the Empire. Time to conquest? Draxus asked. 4 days, Commander. 5 at most if they prove stubborn. Excellent. We have 3 other targets in our expansion queue. The Empire wants this concluded efficiently. The officers began discussing logistics. Supply lines, garrison requirements, occupation procedures, administrative integration protocols. It was all routine. The Zeltharan Empire had refined its conquest methodology over centuries. They were not the largest power in the galaxy, but they were methodical and efficient in their expansion. Zyra continued scrolling through the cultural files. The species had survived multiple planetary extinction events according to geological records. Their world was classified as a high-gravity environment with volatile weather patterns. They had evolved as persistent predators on a planet that seemed actively hostile to complex life. The survey notes described them as unusually adaptable and remarkably persistent. There was that word, again, persistent. It appeared repeatedly throughout the behavioral analysis. Persistent in hunting, persistent in conflicts with each other, persistent in surviving environmental catastrophes, persistent in technological development despite frequent setbacks. Are there any questions before we proceed? Draxus asked, scanning the assembled officers. Zyra raised her hand halfway, then hesitated. She was the most junior officer in the room. Questioning the commander's briefing based on vague unease about behavioral profiles would be inappropriate. The survey team consisted of experienced analysts who understood their work. Her concerns about translation and behavioral patterns were probably nothing significant. She lowered her hand and remained silent. Excellent, Draxus said with satisfaction. All ships prepare for departure. We jump in 6 hours. All crew members are to complete final preparations and report ready status to their department heads. This will be a clean operation. Officers. Quick, efficient, and professional. The briefing concluded. Officers filed out of the war room, already discussing which ships would receive the honor of first orbital positions over the planet's major cities. There was a sense of routine professionalism in the air. This was just another mission. Another primitive world joining the Empire. Another step in Zeltharan expansion across the galaxy. Zyra gathered her data tablet and followed the other officers out. Her unease persisted despite the confident atmosphere around her. Something about the behavioral profiles troubled her at a level she could not articulate. The species seemed wrong somehow. Not weak, despite their primitive technology. Not fragmented, despite their political divisions. Wrong in a way that suggested danger. She considered bringing her concerns to Commander Draxus privately, but dismissed the idea. He was preparing for a major operation. He did not need a junior intelligence officer bothering him with vague feelings based on incomplete data. 6 hours later, the Zeltharan battle group activated their jump drives simultaneously. Space folded around the fleet in a shimmer of exotic particles and bent physics. The journey to their target would take 2 days at faster-than-light velocities. 2 days of final preparations, weapons checks, and rehearsing occupation procedures. Draxus spent much of the journey reviewing psychological profiles of the indigenous species. The survey team had identified key pressure points for forcing compliance. The species valued their offspring intensely, forming powerful emotional attachments. They responded to demonstrations of overwhelming force, but also seemed to respect strength, tempered with restraint. Threaten their young, and they would fight with desperate ferocity. Demonstrate superior power, then offer reasonable terms, and they would likely capitulate. It was a standard psychological warfare formula. It had succeeded on 17 previous worlds. There was no reason to expect failure now. On the second day, the fleet emerged from jump space at the edge of the target system. The planet hung in the distance like a jewel against the infinite black. The fleet formed into attack configuration and began their approach. Engines burning steadily toward their destination, Draxus took his position on the bridge, surrounded by his senior staff. The familiar pre-combat routine unfolded with practiced precision. Every officer knew their role. All ships in formation, Commander. No defensive response detected from the planet. Their satellites have acquired sensor locks on our fleet, but nothing that could threaten our shields or weapons systems. Open all communication frequencies. I want every receiver on that planet to hear our message. Channels open, Commander. Draxus prepared to deliver the surrender demand he had given so many times before. The words were familiar, almost comforting in their routine predictability. State your superiority. Outline the terms. Give them a deadline to consider. Most species surrendered within hours when confronted with such overwhelming evidence of their inferiority. But before he could speak, a voice came through their communication system. It spoke in perfect Zeltharan, which was mildly surprising but not alarming. Translation programs could accomplish that with sufficient processing power. Attention unidentified vessels. This is Earth Defense Command. You have entered protected space without authorization. You have 5 minutes to reverse course and exit the system. Failure to comply will be considered an act of war and met with appropriate force. The bridge crew erupted in amused laughter. Earth Defense Command. What kind of absurdly grandiose title was that for such a primitive civilization? They probably thought the impressive name would intimidate more advanced species. Then someone screamed out it was a young technician at the navigation station. His face suddenly drained of color, his hands trembling as they moved across his controls. Commander, the technician stammered, his voice cracking with something that sounded like pure terror. The planet designation? I just cross-referenced the local identifier with our restricted database. The laughter died instantly. Every officer on the bridge turned to look at the technician. Someone dropped a data tablet. It clattered loudly in the sudden crushing silence. The catalog number GC4471 is just our survey designation, continued. His words coming faster, now tumbling over each other in panic. The indigenous species calls their world by a different name. The locals call it. Draxus felt his blood turn to ice. His scales stood rigid along his spine. Every instinct he had developed over 15 campaigns suddenly screamed danger. He whispered the word before the technician could finish, already knowing what he would say, already understanding the magnitude of their mistake. Earth. The terrible discovery. The bridge remained frozen in horrified silence. Commander Draxus stood motionless, his mind racing through implications that grew worse with each passing second. Earth. The name echoed in his consciousness, like a death sentence. Of all the worlds in the galaxy, they had chosen to invade Earth. Someone tell me this is a mistake, Draxus said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Tell me the database is corrupted. Tell me the translation protocols malfunctioned. The navigation technician checked his display 3 times, his hands shaking so badly he could barely operate the controls. No malfunction, Commander. Cross-reference confirmed through multiple independent systems. Catalog designation GC4471 corresponds to local designation Earth, 3rd planet from their star. The dominant species calls themselves humans. Junior Intelligence Officer Zira was already pulling up every file she could access from the restricted military archives. The secure database opened before her, revealing document after document marked with the highest warning classifications. Red symbols flashed across her screen, each one indicating critical threat assessment data. Commander, Zyra said, her voice shaking. There are 62 separate incident reports from other civilizations involving Earth or humans. All of them marked priority alert. All of them recommend immediate avoidance of military engagement. Senior Tactical Officer Vorn grabbed his own terminal, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror. This cannot be accurate. Our survey team spent 8 months analyzing. GC4471, they would have identified if this was Earth. They would have transmitted emergency warnings. The survey team observed from the outer system only, Sarah explained, scrolling frantically through protocols, standard procedure for preliminary surveys. They cataloged technology levels and resource availability, but never approached close enough for cultural identification. They never intercepted local communications that would have revealed the planet's name. Draxus felt 15 campaigns of experience crumbling beneath him. More than his career was dissolving before his eyes. Possibly his life and the lives of every Zelthran on these 38 ships hung in the balance of decisions made in the next few minutes. Display everything, Draxus commanded. Every report about Earth, every warning, every incident log. I want all of it on the main screen immediately. The holographic display shifted from tactical view to a cascading data stream. Reports began appearing faster than anyone could read them. Incident logs, diplomatic warnings, military assessments, contact protocols, all involving humans. The sheer volume of documentation was staggering. Start with the Korthax Corporation mining incident, Draxus ordered. They're a major economic power. What happened when they encountered Earth? Zyra located the file and projected it onto the main display. The report was 12 cycles old. Written by a Korthax security director named Velcris, Draxus began reading aloud, his voice hollow. The Korthax Corporation established a mining operation in the asteroid belt of system. GC4471. We were unaware the system was inhabited by a spacefaring species. A human vessel approached our mining platform and requested we cease operations, claiming the asteroids were within their territorial space. Political Liaison Officer Krenix interrupted. That seems reasonable for a territorial dispute. Surely the corporation negotiated? Keep reading, Zyra whispered. The Korthax security team dismissed the human request, Draxus continued. Our platform had superior firepower and defensive systems. We assumed the humans would accept our presence once they understood our technological superiority. Instead, the humans sent a single message stating they would give us 72 hours to evacuate before taking action. Vorn leaned closer to the display. What action did they take? The humans did not attack the platform directly, Draxus read. Instead, they began mining the asteroids around our operation. Within 72 hours, they had extracted more ore than our platform had collected in 3 months. They processed the material using improvised refineries built from salvaged equipment. Then they used the refined metals to construct additional mining vessels. Within 2 weeks, they had 20 ships operating in the belt. The bridge crew exchanged nervous glances. That level of rapid industrial expansion was impressive, but not necessarily threatening. The Korthax Corporation attempted to negotiate at that point, Draxus continued, his voice growing quieter. The humans refused all communications. They simply continued mining, building more ships, expanding their operations. Within 6 weeks, they had effectively claimed the entire asteroid belt. Our mining platform became economically unviable. We abandoned the operation at a loss of 40 million credits. They outworked the Korthax, Vorn said in disbelief. The Korthax Corporation has the most efficient mining operations in 7 sectors. The report concludes with a warning, Draxus read. Humans demonstrate unprecedented work capacity and industrial adaptability. They appear capable of sustained effort over extended periods without rest cycles that would be mandatory for other species. They solve logistical problems through improvisation rather than established procedures. Recommend avoiding economic competition with human interests. Zira pulled up another file. Commander, there's a diplomatic incident report from the Venari Council. It is marked critical threat assessment. Display it, Draxus ordered. The Venari report appeared on screen. Draxus felt his stomach tighten as he read the opening summary. First diplomatic contact with Earth occurred during a trade negotiation conference. The Venari delegation arrived prepared to offer standard trade agreements for primitive species. We assumed humans would be grateful for the opportunity to access galactic markets. What went wrong? Krennic asked. The human delegation consisted of 7 individuals, Draxus read. They listened politely to our initial offer, then spent 8 hours analyzing the contract terms. When negotiations resumed, they presented a counter-proposal that exposed 17 separate clauses in our original agreement. That would have been disadvantageous to Earth. They had identified legal loopholes, economic traps, and resource extraction terms that would have given the Venari Council effective economic control over Earth industries. Political liaison officer Krennic shifted uncomfortably in his seat. That suggests sophisticated legal analysis. Unusual for a species we classified as primitive. It gets worse, Zyra said. Continue reading, Commander. The humans then presented evidence that they had researched Venari trade agreements with 14 other species. Draxus continued. They demonstrated that the Venari Council had used similar exploitative terms with each species, resulting in economic dependency. The human chief negotiator stated calmly that Earth would not accept predatory trade terms. She suggested that fair agreement. The Venari delegation attempted to pressure the humans by threatening to exclude Earth from galactic markets, Draxus read. The human response was to present alternative trade partners they had already contacted. Within 3 days of the failed negotiation, Earth had established preliminary trade agreements with 6 different civilizations, all on terms more favorable than what the Venari had offered. Silence fell across the bridge. The implications were clear. Humans were not simply technologically primitive. They were dangerously intelligent, adaptable, and apparently immune to intimidation. There is more, Commander, Zyra said quietly. The report includes behavioral analysis. Draxus scrolled down to the analysis section. What he read there made his scales stand rigid with instinctive fear. Humans demonstrate a behavioral pattern the Venari analysts call competitive spite. When they perceive unfair treatment, they will actively work to undermine those who wrong them, even at cost to themselves. They appear to value fairness and reciprocity above immediate material gain. They hold grudges across extended time periods and will seek revenge for perceived injustices years after the initial incident. That is irrational, Krennic protested. Acting against your own interests for emotional satisfaction makes no strategic sense. It makes perfect sense if you understand human evolutionary history, Zira said, pulling up the xenobiology file. Commander, look at their world classification. The planetary data appeared on screen. Draxus felt his heart sink as he read the environmental parameters. Earth is classified as a Category 5 death world. Gravity 1.1 standard. Temperature ranges from -50 to +50 degrees in habitable zones. Atmospheric oxygen content 21%, which is toxic to most species over extended periods. Weather patterns include electrical storms with millions of volts, rotating wind formations capable of destroying structures, and frozen water precipitation that can bury settlements in hours. Vorn checked the biological data. Their native fauna evolved to survive these conditions. Humans are apex persistence predators. They possess exceptional endurance relative to body mass. They regulate temperature through liquid secretion, allowing sustained activity in extreme heat. They have an emergency response system called adrenaline that temporarily increases strength, speed, and pain tolerance during crisis situations. They hunt by chasing prey until it collapses from exhaustion, Jira added. Their ancestors would track animals for days across their planet's surface. The prey would run until its body failed. Humans would simply keep following. They are biologically designed for relentless pursuit. The bridge crew stared at the data in growing horror. Everything they had assumed about their target was catastrophically wrong. They had not come to conquer primitive species. They had come to invade a world of persistent predators who evolved on a death planet and developed technology despite environmental conditions that would have destroyed most civilizations. Commander, Bourne said carefully, I strongly recommend immediate withdrawal. We entered this system based on fundamentally flawed intelligence. We should retreat and report our error to Imperial Command. Draxus wanted desperately to agree. Every instinct screamed at him to order the fleet to jump away immediately, to put as much distance as possible between his ships and this nightmare world. But political liaison officer Krennic stepped forward before he could give the order. Absolutely not, Krennic declared. The Empire has committed 38 warships to this operation. We have invested tremendous resources. To retreat without even testing their defenses would be humiliating. It would make the Zelthran Empire look weak before the entire galactic community. It would make us look intelligent, Zyra muttered under her breath. Krennic glared at her. You are a junior officer. You will speak only when addressed directly. He turned to Draxus. Commander, I am invoking my political authority as liaison officer. The Empire's reputation requires that we make at minimum a show of force. Fire warning shots across their orbital space. Demonstrate our weapons capability. Then we can negotiate from a position of strength rather than appearing to flee in panic. Draxus hesitated. Every military instinct told them this was wrong. Every piece of data they had just reviewed screamed danger. But political liaison officers had authority to override tactical decisions when strategic imperial interests were at stake. It was part of the command structure, designed to ensure military action served broader political goals. Commander, please reconsider, Warren urged quietly. These reports all recommend the same thing. Do not engage Earth militarily under any circumstances. Diplomatic contact only. I have made my decision, Krennic interrupted. Commander Draxus, you will order a limited demonstration of force. Target empty space near their orbital installations. Show these humans what Zelthran weapons can accomplish. Make them understand who they are dealing with. Draxus closed his eyes. He thought about his family on the homeworld, his offspring who looked up to their father, the military hero. He thought about the 38 ships under his command, thousands of Zelthran lives depending on his decisions. Then he thought about the reports, the warnings, the phrase that kept appearing in every file, do not engage. He opened his eyes and made the decision he would regret for the rest of his life. Tactical, Draxus said slowly. Target empty space 200 kilometers from their space station. Fire a single demonstration burst. Minimum power setting. Just enough to show our weapons' capability. Yes, Commander, Bourne replied, his voice heavy with resignation and dread. The weapons officer entered the firing sequence. Energy built in the Dreadnought's primary batteries, charging to demonstration level output. A brilliant blue beam lanced across the void toward empty space near the human orbital station. For exactly 3 seconds. Nothing happened. Then the humans responded, and Commander Draxus understood with absolute certainty that he had just made the worst mistake of his entire military career. The wisdom of retreat. The human response was not what anyone on the Zelthran bridge expected. There was no panicked communication, no desperate plea for mercy, no fumbling attempt to activate primitive weapons. Instead, there was silence for exactly 3 seconds. Then, space itself seemed to come alive. Hidden weapons platforms that had been invisible to every Zelthran sensor suddenly powered up throughout the solar system. They had been there all along, camouflaged using technology that should not exist on a world the survey team had classified as primitive. Dozens of them, positioned at strategic points throughout Earth's orbital space, all targeting different ships in the Zelthran fleet simultaneously. Multiple target locks, the sensor officer screamed. Weapons platforms appeared from nowhere. I count 47 active targeting systems. They have firing solutions on every ship in our fleet. Before Draxus could issue orders, the platforms fired. Not all of them, just 3. The shots were precise, surgical, and terrifyingly accurate. One beam struck the destroyer's swift wing, penetrating its shields as if they did not exist and disabling its primary weapons array without breaching the hull. Another hit the cruiser Eternal Dawn, knocking out its engines but leaving life support intact. The third struck a frigate, destroying its communications array in a shower of sparks. 3 ships disabled in 3 seconds. No casualties, no hull breaches, no collateral damage. Just perfectly precise strikes that demonstrated complete mastery over Zelthoran defensive technology. Shields are ineffective, Thorn shouted. Their weapons bypassed our defensive fields completely. It is as if our shields were not even active. Zyro was frantically scanning her intelligence files. Commander, there is a report here from the Quinn Collective. They attempted to analyze human weapons technology after a border incident. The report says humans do not develop weapons in traditional progression. They study their... Was incomplete, Hunt interrupted. Yes, we know. Your survey team observed from the outer system and never properly identified our world. That is unfortunate for you, but it does not change the current situation. You are in our space. You fired weapons. Under our rules of engagement, we would be justified in destroying your entire fleet right now. The bridge fell silent. Every Zelthoran officer understood the implicit threat. The humans had demonstrated they could bypass Zelthoran shields. They had weapons platforms positioned throughout the system. They had disabled 3 ships in seconds. If they wanted to destroy the fleet, they probably could. However, Hunt continued, his expression softening slightly. Earth is not interested in unnecessary bloodshed. We understand that mistakes happen. We understand that your intelligence was flawed. What matters now is what happens next. Political Liaison Officer Krennic stepped forward. Admiral, the Zelthoran Empire does not respond well to threats. We have superior numbers and you have 38 ships, Hunt interrupted calmly. We have been counting. You have 3 ships currently disabled. That leaves 35 operational vessels. Would you like to know how many weapons platforms we have in this system? Krennic hesitated. How many? Enough, Hunt said simply. More importantly, would you like to know how many ships we have? Not just the ones you can see, but all of them? The sensor officer frantically scanned the system. Commander, I am detecting new contacts. Ships emerging from behind our moon, from asteroid clusters, from positions inside the orbital debris field. They were hiding in plain sight. I count. One count over 100 vessels. Most are smaller than our ships, but they are all armed and all moving into attack positions. Draxus felt his legs weaken. 100 ships. The humans had more than triple his fleet strength, and they had kept most of it hidden until the perfect moment. This was not the response of a primitive species. This was sophisticated military strategy. I am going to make you an offer, Commander Draxus, Hunt said. Not because I have to, but because I believe in giving people a chance to learn from their mistakes. You have 2 options. First option, you power down your weapons immediately, you accept escort out of our solar system, and you return to your empire with a message about what happened here. You will be allowed to leave peacefully with all your surviving crew. You paused, letting that sink in. Second option, you attempt to fight. If you choose that path, we will show you exactly why 62 different civilizations have filed reports recommending that Earth never be engaged militarily. We will demonstrate why we evolved on a death world and survived multiple extinction events. We will show you what persistence predators do when threatened. I promise you, Commander, you do not want to see that demonstration. Krennic turned to Draxus. Commander, this is clearly a bluff. They cannot possibly. Be quiet, Draxus said coldly. He had made one catastrophic mistake by listening to the political officer. He would not make another. He looked directly at Admiral Hunt on the view screen. What guarantee do we have that you will honor your word? How do we know you will not destroy us once we power down our weapons? Hunt's expression remained neutral. You do not have any guarantee, Commander. You will have to trust us. I realize that is difficult given the circumstances. But consider this. We have already demonstrated we can destroy your ships whenever we choose. We disabled 3 vessels in seconds. If we wanted you dead, you would already be dead. We are offering you a way out because we prefer not to kill when we do not have to. That is the difference between Earth and most other civilizations. We can show mercy even when we have overwhelming advantage. Draxus looked at his tactical display. 3 ships disabled. 35 still operational, but surrounded by more than 100 human vessels and dozens of weapons platforms. The mathematics were brutally simple. If they fought, they would lose. Many Zelthrons would die. The only question was whether he had the wisdom to accept defeat before it became slaughter. Commander? Vorn said quietly, the humans have not fired on any of our disabled ships. They could have destroyed the Swiftwing, the Eternal Dawn, and the Starlight Blade completely. Instead, they disabled them and left them intact. That suggests Admiral Hunt is telling the truth about preferring to avoid casualties. Zira pulled up another file. Sir, there's a report here from the Draxus Confederation. They attempted to raid a human mining colony 8 cycles ago. The humans defeated the raid, captured the Draxus crews, provided medical treatment, and returned them to Draxus space with a diplomatic message. The Draxus military command expected execution or enslavement. Instead, they received their people back unharmed along with a trade proposal. They showed mercy to raiders? Krennic said in disbelief. They showed strategic wisdom, Draxus corrected. The Draxus Confederation is now one of Earth's primary trading partners according to this data. The humans turned enemies into allies by demonstrating both strength and restraint. He looked at Admiral Hunt on the screen. The human commander waited patiently, not rushing the decision. That patience was itself a form of power. Hunt knew he had won. He was simply giving Draxus time to accept reality. Admiral Hunt, Draxus said slowly, I accept your first option. The Zelthron fleet will power down weapons and accept escort from your system. I formally apologize for our intrusion and for firing on your sovereign space. The arrow was mine and mine alone. Relief washed across the bridge. Several officers visibly relaxed. Even Vorn, who had maintained professional composure throughout the crisis, allowed himself a small exhale of tension. A wise decision, Commander, Hunt replied. Power down your weapons systems now. Keep shields at minimum levels for safety. My ships will form an escort formation around your fleet. We will guide you to the edge of our solar system. Once there, you may engage your jump drives and depart. I will also provide you with a comprehensive data package about Earth to share with your empire. Consider it a gift, information that might prevent others from making the same mistake. Krennic stepped forward one last time. Commander Draxus, I must protest this decision. The Empire will view this as me saving 38 ships and thousands of lives. Draxus interrupted. If they disagree, they can remove me from command when we return. But these crews will return home to their families because I made the correct decision today. He turned to Vorn. Tactical. Power down all weapons systems. Maintain shields at 10% for collision protection only. Send the order to all ships in the fleet. Yes, Commander, Vorn replied, relief evident in his voice. The Zelthran ships began powering down their weapons one by one. As they did, the human vessels moved into position around them, not threateningly, but professionally, like an honor guard escorting dignitaries. It was a subtle display of confidence. The humans were not afraid of the Zelthran fleet. They were simply ensuring everyone reached their destination safely. Over the next several hours, the combined fleet moved through Earth's solar system toward the heliopause. Draxus spent the time reviewing the data package Admiral Hunt had transmitted. It was extensive, containing detailed information about human history, culture, military capabilities, and diplomatic protocols. What struck Draxus most was not the military data, though that was sobering enough. What truly impressed him was human history. They had fought devastating wars among themselves for thousands of years. World wars that killed millions. Conflicts that threatened their entire species. Yet somehow they had learned to cooperate, to build global institutions, to reach beyond their world into space. That there was a document in the package titled Why Earth Prefers Peace. Draxus read it carefully. The human author explained that Earth had learned through bitter experience that war was expensive, destructive, and ultimately counterproductive. Humans had developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet. They had come within moments of using those weapons multiple times, but each time they had pulled back from the brink, choosing survival over destruction. We learned, the document stated, that the strongest civilizations are not those who can destroy their enemies most efficiently. The strongest civilizations are those who can turn enemies into allies, who can build cooperation across differences, who can create systems where everyone benefits from peace more than they would gain from war. Zyra read over his shoulder. They sound almost philosophical, Commander. They sound wise, Draxus corrected. They learned lessons we are still struggling with. When the fleet reached the edge of Earth's solar system, Admiral Hunt's voice came through one final time. Commander Draxus, you are now cleared to engage your jump drives. I want you to know that Earth bears no ill will toward the Zelthran Empire. What happened today was a mistake. A serious one, but still a mistake. We hope your empire will consider establishing diplomatic relations in the future. We believe we could accomplish more as partners than as enemies. Draxus felt genuine gratitude. The humans could have destroyed his fleet. Instead, they had shown mercy and offered friendship. Admiral Hunt, I will personally recommend that the Zelthran Empire establish formal diplomatic contact with Earth. I believe the galaxy needs more civilizations like yours. Ones that understand the value of restraint. Safe travels, Commander. Perhaps we will meet again under better circumstances. The transmission ended. Draxus gave the order, and the Zelthran fleet jumped away from Earth. Leaving the blue planet behind. The journey home took 3 days. During that time, Draxus wrote a comprehensive report about everything that had happened. He detailed the intelligence failure, the encounter, the human response, and most importantly, the lesson he had learned. Earth was not to be feared because of their military strength, though that was formidable. Earth was to be respected because they combined strength with wisdom, capability with restraint, power with mercy. When the fleet arrived at the border of Zelthran space, military command immediately demanded an explanation for the reduced fleet size. Draxus transmitted his report and prepared for the consequences. He expected court-martial, disgrace, possibly imprisonment for the disaster he had led his ships into. Instead, something unexpected happened. The Zelthran High Command read his report carefully. They reviewed the data package from Earth. They consulted with military analysts and diplomatic advisors. 3 days later, Draxus received new orders. He was not being court-martialed. Instead, he was being assigned to a new position, Chief Liaison Officer for Earth Relations. His mission was to establish formal diplomatic contact with humanity and ensure that no other Zelthran commander ever made the same mistake he had made. You learned something important? Commander, the High Chancellor told him during a private communication. You learned when to fight and when to retreat. You learned the difference between strength and wisdom. Most importantly, you learned that the most dangerous opponents are not those who want to destroy you, but those who could destroy you and choose not to. Earth could be the Zelthran Empire's greatest ally or its worst enemy. Your job is to ensure they become the former. 6 months later, Draxus stood in the reception hall of Earth's diplomatic headquarters in Geneva. He wore formal Zelthran robes and carried credentials as the first official ambassador from his empire to Earth. Around him, representatives from 30 other civilizations mingled and talked. All of them had learned the same lesson he had learned. Approach Earth with respect. Honesty and peaceful intentions. Admiral Hunt approached him with a warm smile. Ambassador Draxus, welcome to Earth. I am glad to see you again under these much better circumstances. As am I, Admiral. I owe you and your people a debt I can never fully repay. You could have destroyed my fleet, Instead, you showed us mercy and gave us a chance to learn. That is what civilization means, Ambassador. Not the ability to destroy your enemies, but the wisdom to turn them into friends. Hunt gestured to the gathering around them. Look at this room. 31 different species, all of them initially approached Earth with suspicion or hostility. Now they are all trading partners, allies, friends. That is the future we are building together. Draxus looked around the room and felt something he had not expected. Hope. The galaxy was changing. Earth was showing other civilizations a different way forward. One based on cooperation rather than conquest. Wisdom rather than raw power. In the months and years that followed. The story of Draxus and the Zelthran fleet spread throughout the galaxy. It became a cautionary tale that young officers studied in military academies across dozens of worlds. The lesson was always the same. Never underestimate Earth, never threaten humanity. And always remember that the wisest warriors are those who know when not to fight. And in every navigation database, maintained by every civilization in known space, next to Earth's coordinates, there appeared a simple warning that was updated regularly. The wording varied slightly depending on which species maintained the database, but the message was always fundamentally the same. In the Zelthran military database. It read, Earth, human homeworld. Category 5 Death World. Technologically advanced. Militarily capable. Approach with diplomatic credentials only. Military engagement strictly forbidden. Humans prefer peace but are exceptionally skilled at war. They will offer cooperation if approached respectfully. They will demonstrate overwhelming force if threatened. Choose your approach wisely. We learned this lesson at significant cost. Learn from our mistake. Below that, in smaller text, was a personal note added by a former commander. Now, Ambassador Draxus. I attacked Earth with 38 warships and superior technology. The humans could have destroyed my entire fleet in minutes. Instead, they showed mercy, provided medical care to our wounded, escorted us safely from their system, and offered friendship. That is not weakness. That is strength beyond anything I had encountered in 15 military campaigns. Approach Earth with the same respect you would show the most powerful civilization in the galaxy, because that is what they are becoming. Not through conquest, but through wisdom. The warning had been accessed more than 2 million times since it was posted. So far, every civilization that had read it carefully had chosen the path of diplomacy over confrontation. Earth's reputation spread not as conquerors to be feared, but as potential allies to be respected. And in the Zelthran Empire, in military academies where young officers trained for service. The story of Commander Draxus and his encounter with Earth became required study. The final exam question was always the same. If you discover you are about to attack Earth, what is the correct response? The correct answer, the one that every cadet learned to give, was simple. Abort the mission immediately. Apologize sincerely. Request diplomatic contact. And thank whatever fortune allowed you to realize your mistake before it was too late. It was a lesson learned at significant cost. But it was a lesson that, once learned, made the galaxy a safer place for everyone. Because in the end, the greatest victories are not won through battles, but through the wisdom to avoid unnecessary wars and the strength to turn potential enemies into lasting friends. Earth had taught the galaxy that lesson. And slowly, carefully, other civilizations were beginning to learn.